Welcome to Crimson Legacy Historians, where the past is not just remembered, but brought back to life with depth and clarity. The year is 1470. In the mountains of Thessaly, a bell rings one final time across a valley that will never hear it again. Inside the convent of St. Catherine, 23 women kneel in prayer. Their lips move in unison, forming words they've spoken every morning for years. But this morning, the words taste different, like ash, like goodbye. Outside the stone walls, the horizon bleeds red, not from sunrise, but from the banners of an empire that has already swallowed kingdoms whole. The Ottoman army doesn't march. It flows like a river of steel and fire, erasing everything in its path. Sister Alani, the abbess, clutches a silver crucifix that has survived 3 generations. Her hands tremble, but not from fear. She knows what's coming. They all do. What they don't know, what no one could imagine, is that death would have been a mercy. Because what happened next wasn't written in any history book you studied in school. It was buried, erased, hidden beneath centuries of silence until now. What the Ottomans did to these women wasn't just conquest. It was something far more calculated, something that historians are only now beginning to uncover. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth. It's whether you're willing to remember it. If you've ever wondered why certain stories vanish from history while others are told again and again, you're in the right place. Here on Crimson Historians, we dig into the archives the world forgot. Missionary letters, Ottoman state records, testimonies buried in Vatican vaults. Every view, every like, every subscription helps us pull one more voice out of the darkness. Now, let's go back to that convent, because the bell has stopped ringing and the doors are about to break. To understand what happened to these nuns, you need to understand the machine that consumed them. 17 years earlier, in 1453, Constantinople had fallen. The jewel of Christendom, the city that had stood for over 1,000 years, gone in 53 days of cannon fire and blood. The Hagia Sophia, once the greatest cathedral in the world, was stripped of its crosses within hours of the conquest. Its mosaics were plastered over, its bells melted down. Within a week, the call to prayer echoed from its domes where hymns had sung for 9 centuries. Sultan Mehmed Roman, too, stood in the nave of that ancient church and declared it a mosque, not because he needed another place of worship, because he understood something most conquerors don't. You don't defeat a people by killing them. You defeat them by erasing who they were. The Ottomans didn't just conquer land, they conquered identity. When Mehmed looked west toward the scattered remnants of the Byzantine world, he saw wounds that refused to heal. Every church bell that still rang, every monastery that still stood, every cross casting shadows on conquered soil. These were declarations, acts of defiance, proof that the old world refused to die. And every nun who still prayed in Latin was a living reminder that faith could outlast armies. So the Sultan made a decision. If they will not convert, they will disappear, not through massacre. Massacre creates martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written, stories are told, the dead become immortal. The Ottomans had perfected something far more elegant, something that left no songs, no stories, no memory. Erasure. By 1470, this strategy had been tested across the empire. Greek monasteries in Morea, Serbian convents in the Balkans, Armenian churches in Anatolia. They didn't burn them all. They converted some, abandoned others. But the pattern was always the same. First came the offer, then came the silence. The convent of St. Catherine, perched on a hillside in Thessaly, far from any garrison or ally, was about to become another test case, another footnote in an empire's expansion. But these women didn't know they were footnotes. These weren't warriors. They were women who had spent their entire lives in silence and prayer. Their weapons were rosaries. Their armor was faith. Most of them had never seen a soldier, never held a blade, never imagined they would need to. Sister Alelin had been abbot for 12 years. Before that, she attended the sick in a village that no longer existed, swallowed by plague in 1448. She came to the convent not to escape the world, but to make sense of it. Sister Magdalena was 19. She had taken her vows only 2 years before. Her hands still bore the calluses from her father's farm. She joined the convent after her family was killed in a raid. The convent was the only place she had felt safe since. Sister Theodorus was 70. She had outlived 2 abbesses, an emperor, and more wars than she could count. She had stopped fearing death decades ago, but none of them had ever faced this. If this moment in history doesn't move you to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors died to teach, that the most dangerous thing you can do in the face of power is refuse to forget who you are. Now let's watch what happens when faith meets empire. The first cannonball hits just after dawn. It doesn't strike the chapel, it strikes the bell tower. The sound is apocalyptic. Stone explodes into the air. Iron shrieks against iron. The bell that has rung every morning for 140 years shatters mid-swing, and the pieces rain down onto the courtyard where the sisters grow herbs for healing. The same hands that tended those plants now cover their ears, trembling. Sister Elelyn doesn't scream. She stands, crucifix raised high, and begins to sing. The Kyrie Ellas, Lord have mercy. One by one, the others join her. 23 voices rising against the roar of an empire. But empires don't listen to songs. By midday, the gates are breached. Ottoman soldiers pour into the courtyard, not with swords drawn, with ledges, quills, ink pots. They move through the convent like clerks, not conquerors, counting, recording, cataloging. Because to the Ottomans, these women aren't people, they're assets. A translator steps forward, a Greek man who once lived in these hills. His voice shakes as he reads from a scroll, and you can hear the shame buried in every word. By order of Sultan Mehmed Roman II, all subjects of the conquered territories must submit to the authority of the Sublime. Those who convert will be granted protection. Those who refuse will face the consequences of rebellion. Sister Eleni steps forward. Her face is calm, almost serene. She speaks not to the soldiers, but to the translator in Greek, so clear that everyone understands. Tell your sultan that we have already given our lives to a king. We have nothing left to surrender. The officer in charge, a man named Hassan Pasha, whose name appears in Ottoman military records from the 1470th Thelian campaign, doesn't respond with anger. He responds with something far more chilling, a smile, because he knows something the nuns don't yet understand. The Ottomans have perfected the art of breaking people without killing them. That night, the women are locked inside their own chapel. No food, no water, just darkness and the sound of soldiers outside, laughing, eating, living, while they wait to see who breaks first. 2 sisters, younger ones from Corinth, begin to weep in the corner. Their sobs echo off the stone walls, but Sister Magdalena, barely 20 years old, begins to whisper a psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Then another, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Then another, and slowly the weeping stops. This is the moment the Ottomans underestimated them. These women had spent their entire lives preparing for suffering, fasting, vigils in the cold, hours of silence, submission to something greater than themselves. What the soldiers saw as torture, the nuns saw as their daily discipline. But Hassan Pasha is patient. He has seen this before, in Maria in Wacchia, in the ruins of Serbian monasteries where monks thought their faith would save them. Faith is like a candle, he once wrote in a letter to the Sultan, still preserved in the Topkapi Palace archives. It burns brightest just before it dies. He's about to test that theory. On the second day, the doors open. A servant enters with bread and water, real food, clean water. He sets it down without a word and leaves. The nuns stare at it. Their throats are dry, their stomachs hollow. The younger sisters look to Eleni, desperation in their eyes. Sister Theodorus, the eldest, speaks first. They want us to take it, to feel gratitude, to soften. Elaine nods. Then we fast. They don't touch the food. By the third day, their lips are cracked and bleeding. Their hands shake. The younger sisters can barely stand, but they don't break. Hassan Pasha watches from the courtyard, arms crossed. He's impressed, frustrated, and perhaps just for a moment, something close to respect flickers across his face. But respect doesn't change strategy. On the third day, the doors open again. This time, it's not a servant, it's Hassan himself. He speaks in Turkish, and the translator follows behind him like a shadow. You are not criminals, you are not enemies, you are simply mistaken. The Sultan is merciful. He offers you new lives, new names, protection. All you must do is speak the words, silence, or you can come with us to Constantinople. There the Sultan himself will hear your case. Perhaps he will be moved by your conviction. He pauses, lets the word settle, but the road is long, and the weak do not survive it. It's not a threat, it's a promise. Sister Elelen looks at her sisters. Some are barely conscious, some are praying with their eyes closed, some are staring at the floor, trying to find strength in the stone. She turns back to Hassan. We will walk. The smile returns to his face. Good. We leave at dawn. That night, the nuns hold each other in the darkness. No one speaks, but Sister Magdalena begins to humbly, a hymn they sang at Vespers. One by one, the others join her. Outside, the soldiers hear it. Some of them pause, some of them look away. One of them, years later, will tell his grandson about the women who sang themselves to death. But that story will be forgotten too, for now the hymn rises through the cracks in the chapel walls and drifts out into the night. A prayer, a plea, a declaration. We are still here. They leave at dawn on the fourth day. 23 women, hands bound with rope, walking south toward the coast. No carts, no horses, just their feet and the dust and the sun that shows no mercy. The soldiers don't rush them. They don't need to. The road itself is the punishment. By the second day, Sister Irene collapses. She's 62. Her knees have been failing for years. She tries to stand, but her legs won't hold her. The soldiers don't wait. Sister Magdalena and another nun, Sister Anna, lift her between them and carry her for the next 3 miles. When they finally stop for the night, Irene is unconscious. By morning, she's gone. They bury her by the roadside with their hands. No tools, no ceremony, just dirt and whispered prayers. The soldiers watch. They don't stop them. Hassan Pasha makes a note in his ledger, 22 remaining. On the fourth day, it happens again. Sister Callista, who hasn't spoken since the siege, simply stops walking. She sits down in the middle of the road, closes her eyes, and doesn't get up. They leave her there. By the time they reach the port of Volos 7 days later, only 18 remain, but something happened on that road, something the Ottomans didn't anticipate. The nuns stopped weeping, stopped begging. They walked in silence, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the silence of women who had already made their choice. Sister Eleni had been walking at the front of the line, leading them even with her hands bound. But on the morning of the 7th day, Hassan Pasha calls for her. She's brought to his tent alone. What happens next isn't described in Ottoman records. It's described in a letter from a Venetian merchant who witnessed the aftermath. A letter discovered in 2003 in the archives of Drovnik. He writes, I saw them bring her back at dawn. She could not walk. Her eyes, God forgive me, her eyes were open, but she was not inside them anymore. They dressed her in silk and paraded her through the camp as a convert. But when I passed close, I heard her lips moving. She was still praying in Latin, silently. She had not broken. They had simply taken her body and left her soul to wander. This is the Ottoman strategy that history doesn't teach you. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. Songs are written, stories are told, the dead become saints. They wanted ghosts. Women who would walk, talk, eat, breathe, but would never be whole again, living proof that rebellion was futile, living warnings to anyone who thought faith could stand against empire. Sister Elelen walked with them the rest of the way to the coast, but she never spoke again, never looked anyone in. She was there, but she wasn't. The younger sisters wept when they saw her. The older ones just prayed harder. At the port of Volos, they're loaded onto a galley, a massive warship with rows of benches and chains bolted to the wood. This is not a passenger ship. This is a vessel designed for control. Slaves, prisoners, cargo. The nuns are chained to the benches, wrists locked to iron rings. A ship's manifest discovered in 1987 in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace Museum lists them not by name, but by number. Religious captives, female 18, destination, imperial household, purpose, domestic service, and conversion. That word service is doing a lot of work. The voyage lasts 12 days. The sea is not kind. Storms lash the deck. Salt spray stings their cracked lips. The ship pitches and rolls, and the women who have never seen the ocean vomit until there's nothing left. At night, the youngest. Sister Magdalena whispers psalms beneath her breath. Her voice is faint, barely audible over the crashing waves, but the other prisoners, Greeks, Serbs, Italians, men and women chained beside them, turn their heads to listen. For a moment the sea seems to still. When the ship finally enters Bosphorus, the sisters see the skyline of Constantinople rise before them. Domes, minarets, walls that seem to stretch forever. The city gleams in the dawn light like a blade. For centuries it had been called the city of the world's desire. Now it would become their cage. From the docks they march through narrow streets lined with merchants, soldiers, and slaves. People stopped to stare. Christian nuns among the captives are a rarity, even in an empire built on conquest. This is unusual. They're led past the ancient walls, through the imperial district, past gardens where fountains sing and peacocks scream, and then in the shadow of Hagia Sophia, the great church that is now a mosque, they're forced to stop, to kneel. As the call to prayer echoes from the minarets, one of the sisters whispers, "We are home, but it is no longer ours." They're taken to the palace, but not the grand halls, not to the courtyards where ambassadors walk and vassals conspire. They're taken beneath down stone steps that spiral into darkness, through tunnels that smell of damp and decay, to a place that doesn't officially exist. If you're still watching, it's because part of you knows this story needs to be told. Subscribe to Crimson Historians, not for us, but for them, for the voices that were swallowed by silence. Now let's follow them into the dark. Beneath Topkapi Palace, there's a network of tunnels that tourists never see. Storage rooms, servant quarters, forgotten corridors that wind through the bedrock like veins, and in the farthest corner, sealed off for centuries, a room with no official purpose. In 2011, during restoration work, archaeologists broke through a false wall. What they found stopped them cold. Scratched into the stone, barely visible, were crosses. Dozens of them, small, crude, carved with fingernails or shards of broken pottery. And beneath those crosses, etched in Latin, 4 words, lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. This was their chapel. For months, maybe years, these women lived beneath the palace, working as silent servants by day, scrubbing floors, washing linens, tending fires for rooms they would never enter. But at night, when the palace slept, they gathered in this forgotten room and prayed. They had no priest, no altar, no Bible, just memory. They recited psalms from recall, verses half-forgotten, reshaped into prayers that kept them alive. They sang hymns in whispers so faint the stone barely caught them. They held communion with bread stolen from the kitchens and water from the palace wells. And they carved their faith into stone, one scratch at a time, knowing no one would ever see it. Sister Magdalena was among them, the girl who had whispered psalms on the ship, who had carried Sister Irene on the road, who had refused to look away when they brought Sister Eleni back in silk. She became their voice in the dark. The archaeologists found her mark too, a small bird scratched in the corner of the wall. Beside it, 23 lines, one for each sister, but only 11 lines were complete. The rest trailed off into nothing. They used broken pottery for candle holders, a scrap of linen for an altar cloth. From a shard of a shattered mirror, they fashioned a crude cross. In this secret chapel they gathered each night after the palace slept. No hymns, no sermons, only whispers. Each woman knelt and shared a memory, her home, her church bell, the warmth of bread before dawn. These memories became their new psalms, small offerings to a God who still listened in the dark. a Venetian prisoner held in the palace for ransom in 1478, wrote of strange voices echoing beneath the harem, women singing in Latin to a god not of this empire. For centuries, historians dismissed it as superstition until they found the chapel. But here's what breaks your heart: the crosses stop halfway through the wall. The scratches become erratic, desperate. The lines deepen as if carved with more force, more urgency. Then nothing. Ottoman records from 1482 mention a cleansing of the palace staff under the new sultan. Anyone deemed unproductive or resistant was removed. No details, no names, no burial sites, just one line in a ledger written in neat Ottoman script. Disposed. The nuns of St. Catherine vanished from history. 18 women who had walked 7 days through hell, who had crossed the sea in chains, who had carved prayers into stone in the dark, gone, but their chapel remained. A French diplomat in 1712 wrote about a rumor among the older palace servants that on certain nights, if you stood in the lower halls, the air would grow cold, and if you listened closely, you could hear women singing in Latin. He dismissed it as superstition, the foolish beliefs of uneducated servants. But the walls don't lie. In 2011, when the archaeologists examined the chapel more closely, they found something else. Traces of wax, not from Ottoman candles, but from a different source, older, mixed with herbs, the kind of candles nuns made in convents, which means they kept their vigil for longer than anyone thought possible. Months, maybe years, carving crosses, whispering prayers, refusing to disappear. Sister Magdalena's bird was the last mark on the wall. Beside it, scratched so faintly it almost wasn't there. 2 words in Greek, we endure. But the truth is, they didn't just endure. They left something behind that empires couldn't erase. A room full of crosses, a prayer carved in stone, proof that faith could survive where walls and chains could not. The Ottoman Empire lasted until 1922, 600 years of conquest and power. But in the end, it was those scratches on the wall that survived, not the Sultan's decrees, not Hassan Pashar's ledgers, not the silk they dressed Sister Ilani in. Just 4 Latin words carved by women the world forgot. Lux in tenebris lucer, the light shines in the darkness. So why does this story matter? Because it's not about religion, it's not even about the Ottomans. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people, and what happens when those people refuse to disappear. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. They conquered 3 continents. They rewrote maps, languages, entire cultures. They turned the greatest cathedral in Christendom into a mosque. They ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But they couldn't erase 18 women who scratched prayers into stone. Think about that. An empire with armies, cannons, endless resources, and the will to reshape the world against women with nothing but fingernails and faith, and the women won not in the way empires measure victory. They didn't reclaim their convent, they didn't convert their captives, they didn't live to see freedom, but they left a mark. History is written by the victors, but memory is written by the survivors, and sometimes survival looks like a cross carved in the dark where no one was supposed to see it. A prayer whispered in a language the conquerors tried to silence. A bird scratched into stone to remember the sisters who fell. Centuries later we found it anyway. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." These women lived forward into darkness. They walked 7 days knowing they might not survive. They crossed the sea in chains knowing what waited on the other side. They descended into tunnels beneath a palace knowing they might never see sunlight again. But they carved their prayers anyway, trusting that someone someday would look backward and find them. You just did. In 2011, when the archaeologists stood in that hidden chapel staring at those crosses, one of them asked a question that haunts me. How long did they keep the vigil? The wax traces suggest years. The depth of some carvings suggests desperate, repeated effort, which means these women gathered night after night, year after year in absolute darkness and refused to stop believing, even when sisters disappeared, even when the scratches on the wall stopped growing, even when hope should have died. They kept carving. That's not just faith, that's defiance in its purest form. The Ottoman Empire is gone now, dissolved in 1922. Its sultans are dust, its armies are memory. The palace still stands, but it's a museum now. Tourists walk its halls taking pictures, unaware of what lies beneath their feet. But those crosses remain, and that Latin phrase, barely visible after 500 years, still speaks. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. It's from the Gospel of John, a verse about light that cannot be extinguished, about truth that survives even when everything else is taken away. Sister Magdalena carved those words knowing she would never leave that palace, knowing her name would be forgotten, knowing the world would move on without her. But she carved them anyway because she understood something that empires never do. You can conquer land, you can rewrite history, you can erase names from ledgers and bury bodies in unmarked graves, but you cannot kill what people carry inside them, and you cannot silence what they carve into stone. You've just witnessed one of history's darkest truths. If stories like this remind you how fragile humanity is, how easily voices can be erased, then subscribe to Crimson Historians and keep the past alive, because some voices deserve to be heard, even if they were silenced centuries ago, especially then, the nuns of St.